Hey friends, this is Allison Steele, and you're listening to Unravel with Allison, a show where I take a concept that's got me in knots, and we unravel it together. Thanks for being here. Today we're talking about justice. Justice is the quality of being just, or impartial. What does just mean? Based on, or behaving according to what is morally right and fair. Just also means exactly. Just also means recent or immediate past. In the tarot, Justice card is number 11. If you look at the imagery on that card, the man draped in red is sitting at the throne, draped in red. And the red indicates power, strength, passion, confidence, inspiration, creativity. Those are big words for justice. Those are big meanings for justice. There's also two pillars that are holding up a reddish purple drape along the back. Purple's royal. Red is everything that I just mentioned before. It's a mixture of those energies. Along with the royal, they are wearing a crown with short blonde hair, fair hair. So you see how the fairness is already tying into this. Then you take a look at the scales. There's balancing scales, and they are perfectly even. Also worth noting, there's nothing inside of them worth balancing. There's nothing to balance. There's nothing to notice. Additionally, a sword is held up almost on display, palm forward, but it's held up evenly and straight. There are no marks on it. There's been no notations that there has been battle. It's just a normal sword. And the swords in tarot signify intellect, air, flowing through our airwaves, our mental, our ideas. Justice is a mental game. If you break the word apart, justice, Justice, split it up, just ice. It's exactly what it is. It is just. And if it's ice, it's cold-hearted by nature. That's how I look at justice. I think that justice, everything that happens in the world just is. It just is, and that's the true justice of it, is that after it happens, you can't undo it. It is just and exact. Doesn't mean it's morally right or fair, but after something's happened, it has been happened. When we look into the criminal justice system, I don't see a whole lot of justice there. I see a whole lot of hurt there, where people take and demand reparations. I've had tangos with the criminal justice system. I've had a bad driving record for speeding. I've been in some accidents. I've had to face a court. I've only been arrested once. We're going to talk about that a little bit. In previous episodes, I've mentioned a marriage, no longer in that marriage, and it was very short term, and it messed with me mentally. It really did, because my partner was away at boot camp, came back, got engaged, got married, everything went to trash, and then the relationship was over. The part that messed with me more than anything else was the lack of emotional availability, or availability in general. During boot camp with the Marines, you don't get phone calls. You don't get FaceTimes. You don't get communications in the same way that other branches do. This was old school. Like, this was in 2014, and we wrote each other every day. Every single day, I would write a letter and send it. Every single day. She was receiving letters from me in boot camp. And she wrote to me too when she had time. Sometimes I'd get letters that were next to nothing, but I still had communications. And what was wild is that this type of communication that we had just writing, to me, strengthened our relationship beyond belief. This was the first time I've had access to these personal, deep thoughts and feelings. What I thought we shared in person was great, and then when it was put on paper in this way, just sharing our thoughts, experiences, and our journeys without each other, it felt like a grand connection. I was excited to look in my mailbox for that letter every day. And I mean, even when she was in boot camp, they used that stuff against her. Like, I wrote every day, and they withheld my letters for weeks, to where I was getting letters like, I don't know if you've stopped writing, but I'm going to keep writing. They've got her in there worried that, like, I gave up and I just dipped out. Like, I stopped communicating. I didn't do it. That's what boot camp is. They break you down, they build you up. So we have this strength there. Everything gets worked out. I'm there for graduation. Everything moves forward. Then everything is bad again. Because there's no more emotion, there's no more communication, there's no more connection. Now that we have access to calls, texts, and emails, I don't get any. And she's in all this intensive training that I'm aware of. I do have consideration for that. But then when she wasn't, I wasn't being factored in as a life partner or even as a friend. And it started driving me crazy. Like, why wasn't I good enough? Why doesn't my partner want to be a partner with me? Why can you go hang out with your friends, but you don't give me the time of day? Why when I open up to you, you shut me down? I tried and tried and tried the best that I knew how, but I was very young, and my skills were not very good. I wasn't trying in a good way, and it was eating me alive. I put everything into this. But I was just called crazy and intrusive, and I was all of those things. I remember one time when she came back on a visit, we were out and about somewhere and I was driving us home. We got into an argument and I felt like I was at a breaking point. We were screaming at each other. I was driving erratically and I pulled over because she was there and I couldn't be in the car with her for another second. I didn't want to drive like an asshole and put us both in danger, but that's all I was physically capable of doing in the moment. And it was scary after having pulled over and looking at my behavior to see like, oh, that was not a safe move. And then she was gone again and I was with my friends again. We just had St. Patrick's Day come and pass by and it sparked this topic of justice for me again. St. Patrick's Day in 2015, I didn't celebrate because I was hungover. What did I do the night before? I went out with my friend for dinner. We had drinks with dinner and then afterwards we went to the liquor store and got this pour and serve margarita. I wasn't paying attention to the labeling and I bought tequila on top of that and we came home and drank it. We left again to go to a bar and I drove home that night. We were completely trashed. We worked together, so the next day when we woke up and went to work, we were like vomiting while we were at work, barely able to function, still kind of drunk. I worked my shift and went home, canceled my plans, and I went and slept all day long. I woke up at like 9 p.m. and went to Waffle House and just came back home and went to sleep. That should have been a red flag for me, and it wasn't. That was just a silly, goofy thing that we did. I knew that it wasn't right, but I didn't realize exactly how wrong it was until I got in real trouble for it. Because 3 weeks later, I went and did something similar. I took my friend out for her birthday, and I got a DUI. So the justice system here, when I got pulled over, I deserved to be pulled over. When I got arrested, I deserved to be arrested. I got a lawyer. I got the DUI dropped to a reckless operation if I agreed to do the weekend OVI program. So of course I did. The lawyer and the program cost money. I had to afford it. And when I lost my license, I didn't drive other than work, where I had papers, and I kept my clock out slip so that if I did get pulled over on my way home, I'd have that slip with me. I'd have my papers with me, so I'd show you that this is the only place I'm allowed to go. I didn't have my license. I worked in a restaurant. I brought pizza home for every meal because I wasn't even going to risk going to the grocery store. This was almost a decade ago, and my behavior was reckless, continually reckless. After that OVI, though, I realized that I could not literally afford the financial repercussions of this to continue the behavior. You hear all these stories about these terrible things that happen because of drunk drivers. I've heard them too, but at the time I just thought that wasn't me. And honestly, when I made the phone calls and had to explain to people what I did and why I can't drive in for holidays and what my situation is and just be open about my situation with my family, they all knew it was messed up. They all knew that it was bad behavior. Nobody was proud of me. And everybody said, we all did it, you just got caught. Not that they still do it, but the notion here is we all did it, you just got caught. But what if I didn't? I was working in a restaurant, and one of the girls that worked with me was very similar to me. She was a little bit younger than I was, but I saw the parallels between us. She reminded me of when I was younger, of wanting to be really good at her job, not wanting to mess anything up, wanting to be seen as perfect in everybody's eyes, not so they can be praised for it, but so they could play their part and do what they're supposed to and bring value. This isn't something that a lot of people have in professional places. This girl had it, and I saw it. There were so many parallels between us, and that pressure that you put on yourself in the professional workplace, we shared that same type of stress together. Most people in that industry don't really care about their jobs on the day-to-day. She was just a little different. In 2019, we were no longer working together. She turned 21. Her husband filed for divorce. She also had a weird medical history that she was on medication for psychogenic seizures. She had been going through a divorce, and it was pretty fresh. Brand new wound. Her husband filed for divorce, and within 2 weeks, I imagine she was in that same mental space that I was when I was losing my shit in the car. She had a phone call with her partner. The situation was still the same. She had given up. He said he didn't want to see her that evening. She texted him to tell him goodbye, I love you, and I'm dying now. She got on the highway going the opposite direction with the intent to kill herself. Instead, she hit another vehicle and killed 2 adults and their 10-year-old daughter. In 2023, they had finally gotten around to seeing her trial, and it was a bench trial, so the judge rules the verdict. And given her medical history of seizures and everything that came out during the trial, she got off. And the family spoke out about how that was an injustice, that there was enough information there to see that this person killed my family and they are getting away with it. It doesn't seem justified. But even with the background of the mental issues, and at the scene of the crash, her jaw was locked shut, which those who took care of her immediately had to do an emergency tracheotomy to create an airway for her. So whether that was from the trauma or if it was from a seizure, because that came up in trial too, is that the accident may have been from the seizure. They could have all been happening at once. It was the intent that was really missing, the intent to kill that family, that got her off. She intended to kill herself, not them. So for the specifics that they were looking, the boxes that they need to check to meet the profile of what she was being charged with, they couldn't do it. I share this story because I relate with this woman in several ways, and it's uncomfortable to me that I do. The relationship that we shared prior to this event, what I knew of her as a young girl coming up, she had a whole life ahead of her, and she'll never get an opportunity to explore what that looks like now with this on her record. I mean, even mentally, dealing with the fact that that had happened, what she caused, I can't imagine she's doing well. And I can't look at this situation transparently and say that she got what she deserved. But had she been convicted, I don't think that I could also say that she got what she deserved. We're going to talk about just desserts, because this is what it gets into. Let's say that she did. She went to prison. She got her just desserts. She got what she deserved. It's pronounced like desserts, like a sweet treat, but it's spelled like deserts. And that word was derived from Latin, derived from servire, which means to serve. This whole thing, just desserts, means you're served what you deserve. That's what you get. But when we factor in this criminal justice system and the felony disenfranchisement and what that does to us on a grand scale, like it varies by states, but some rights that can be lost by just having a felony, voting rights, traveling abroad, owning guns, the right to bear arms, jury duty, employment in certain fields, public social benefits and housing, and parental benefits can be taken if someone is charged with a felony. And our criminal justice system is off the rails. The amount of prisons we have is just astronomical. It is absurd what we do to people and how we treat them and what happens when they come out. I was sitting in a booth with somebody that was a little bit older than me. We were working on a project together, but it was a small enclosed space. And we were having a conversation about eating meat. And that I still do, but it wigs me out in a lot of ways. And he was explaining that he doesn't, and how his body feels differently because of that. And I asked him what encouraged that change? What made you want to do that? What was your breaking point? Explain to me how you got here. And he paused for a moment, and that's when I realized what it was. I knew before I even asked, but I forgot that I knew his story. He had shared his podcast with me, and I listened to his podcast. And his podcast is about ending gun violence. And he shares his story about going to jail because of gun violence. And he didn't kill anybody. But when he was 17 years old, he was involved in a gun violent situation. And at 17 years old, got sentenced to 25 years and served it. So when I bring up that question in a very small enclosed space, and he doesn't know that I know his story, I saw it in his eyes, where he wanted to tell me the truth, but he didn't want me to judge him. He didn't want me to feel scared being in that small space with him. And that was validated too, because he brought it up. When he told me he didn't have better options. And when he said he didn't have better options, that's when it clicked for me. I was like, oh, of course, because he was in prison. So he takes a deep breath and he starts to go into this tailored version of how he tells his story. If you've been through it, you have to come up with one. You have to be your own authority figure. You have to rewrite your story. You have to be able to explain it from your point of view. Because we know damn well if we rely on the criminal justice system to do it for us, we're destroyed from here on out. But he explained to me, I didn't kill anybody. I got in trouble when I was younger and I served 25 years in prison. As soon as he said that, I didn't want him to have to explain himself for my sake any longer. And I just let him know right there. I remember that. I listened to your podcast. That explains it. That makes a lot of sense. If you didn't have anything else to eat, of course that's what you would do. He's like, you can't eat that stuff. Nobody should eat that stuff. He's like, it's not just bad food. Nobody should eat that stuff. But that's what we're serving people. And another friend I have that's been to prison, I learned this year, she told me that she got her medical care from the university students. She's getting subpar health care, or maybe the best. I don't know, because sometimes when the kids are learning, they're at their top tier. This might be when they care the most, but they're the least intuitive. I don't know. I can't make sense of this. I can't make sense of this being justice. There are these programs in prisons, so you get your GED, you get job training, you learn and build skills so that you have something on the way out. That exists in some places, and that's great for those that do. I respect the fact so much that my grandpa was involved in prison ministries. I can't imagine what it must have done for somebody to just be there, to not amplify the reality that's in front of them. This idea of you deserved this. You got what you deserved, so what are you going to make of it? I don't think anybody deserves anything that I just explained. I don't think anybody deserves being in prison, being treated how you're treated in prison. Even if you get a GED, but you don't get to vote, you don't even get to be on jury service. What if a jury puts you in there? You don't get to experience what that's like after the fact? I was called up for jury duty earlier this month. I've never actually done it. I've been called up twice, and it's been canceled before I've ever had to show up. The first time I got my service, I was excited to do it. I was like, this is my right as a citizen. Naturally, I was in good citizen mode, and I thought that it would be a cool thing to do, and I would be able to support my community and all this stuff. When I got it this most recent time, I was like, I don't want to go and be a part of this. I don't care who did what. This is not how these systems work. This just assigns blame and ruins lives. This isn't rehabilitation. This isn't corrections. This is punishment, and that's literally it. Even if you are benefited while you are being punished, I can't get behind it. You can't undo what you have done. It is what it is. Water under the bridge. A lot of people hate those sayings because there's no accountability there. There's nobody assigning blame. There's nobody assigning solution. There's nobody assigning follow-up or wrap-up. Like there's nothing happening. And that bothers people who have been slighted. But once something is done, you cannot undo it. It has happened and it cannot be changed now. So if the water's under the bridge, where are you? Are you crying at the banks? Or are you on the bridge, meaning that you're over it and above it? You see it's beyond your reach, so it's no longer notable. Not saying you're not affected by it, but destroying somebody else to bring you up, giving somebody else what they deserve, isn't going to bring back what you lost. The definition of justice, again, the quality of being just or impartial. And just meaning what is morally right and fair, we just covered that. Just exact, just desserts, we covered that. Just meaning recent or immediate past, water under the bridge. Justice based on or behaving according to what is morally right and fair. We all have different definitions of what is morally right and fair. For example, people who grew up without a strong family unit aren't going to value family in the same way that I do. What is morally right and fair in my eyes is not morally right and fair in somebody else's eyes. So a great example of this. I've got a family member coming into town for a tournament with two of their friends. He's a jokester. He was going to invite me out to dinner when they're in town. So he was letting me know what the dates were. He said, we're going to be in town on this date for this reason. I said, great, let me put it on my phone. So as I'm adding it to my calendar, he tells me that they need to stay at our house. And immediately I'm like, okay, we can do that because the two kids have actually 3 beds in their room. So we can have them sleep with us. And then like you're all adults, but you're going to have a twin bed. You guys can all stay in the same room. But yeah, we've got space for you. And what a riot that was, because that's not what anybody wants to do. They want to go out and have a good time while they're in town. They want to stay at a hotel. They want to not be in a house where a 3 and a 5-year-old are. But it was just something funny that he did to gauge my reaction. And this is how my family jokes with each other. But this is also how my family takes care of each other. When you need something and you ask something and we have the means, we will do it. Not everybody in my family is like this, but this person asking me and the people he live with, they're like that. They raised me. So I still can't help to have this thing inside of me that if you see a need, you fill a need. I still have that feeling. I still have that motive. But I'm no longer on the constant search for the need. I'm not looking to be needed. But when the opportunity arises, I'm there to meet it. Now, for some people, that sounds like a nightmare. And for some people, my instant reaction of approval and open arms is seen as very toxic family behavior. And that you don't owe them anything, which I don't. I recognize that. In that specific scenario, I didn't have to offer up my space. I didn't have to agree to it. And respectfully, I should have discussed it with my partner first. But that's not how I was raised. That is not my first nature. That is not what makes sense to me. That is not exact. That is not morally right or fair. They come through for me constantly. How could I not do the same for them when I have the capacity to do it? It just makes sense. So that tarot card, that person in the justice card is just sitting there. So even though the sword's ready, it's just on display. It's not being used, and it's not in attack position. The scales are available, but there's nothing in them. This is a nothing's happening moment. And the card number is 11. The previous card number is 10. That's the Wheel of Fortune. That's when you're in queue. That's when you're just living your life and behaving, and the Wheel of Fortune comes and gives you a next thing. It's the part that factors in all of your chance, all of your opportunity. It's based on your action, but it's also left up to the wheel. You have your will and you have the wheel. You can control your will and choose what to do and how to behave, but you can't choose the effect. You can't choose the outcome. Ultimately, this card shows me fair treatment and that I'm ready. I see everything just as it is. Everything just is. I'm not balancing. I'm not fighting. I'm not ready for a fight. I'm not ready to measure. I'm here with passion. Remember that red. And now my foot's out. If the scales tip, I'm going to have to make a physical adjustment for that too. I'm going to have to tolerate that weight difference. My feet are not even because they're ready. To me, justice is just being ready. It's seeing that everything just is. Let that water under the bridge. It is what it is doesn't have to be this nihilistic feeling of depravity or lack of power, lack of control. It's just a lack of outcome. You cannot control anything but your action. You can't control anything but your action. You can't control your circumstances. You can't control your scenarios. You can't control other people's feelings. And we shouldn't be controlling people the way that the criminal justice system encourages us to put other people behind bars. Because what happens when they get out? They lose extra rights. And the way that these people who have been in prison defend themselves to me, somebody who doesn't care, I wasn't uncomfortable sitting in that small booth with him. Granted, I did know his story. If it had just come up in that situation, I also don't think I'd care. Because the way that he treated me when I was right in front of him was just. He treated me well. He treated me like another student. He treated me like a person who he acknowledged may have a reaction to what he was willing to share with me. And he tried to mold the information to be palpable for me to consume it. It seems to me like he doesn't really get to have a casual conversation. It's not something you're allowed to just bring up. It's impactful. It's an impactful thing to say. I went to prison. Personally, not me. I've never been to prison. I don't know. I've been arrested once and I didn't even stay overnight or have to be held in a cell or anything like that. And I went home that night. I can't compare my situation anything near towards the people who have served time, what they've experienced. But what they've shared with me, I can't understand it. That car accident with a coworker, it was uncomfortable how much it reminded me of my situation. As I've looked into healing and psychology and medications and mental health and therapy and spirituality and meditation, change of environment, change of entertainment, I tried to do everything I possibly could to be a better person. I tried to get myself out of situations where I wasn't a good person. There's this saying, an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior. I don't think anybody here can get behind the idea that killing yourself is normal behavior. But also having a partnership that you put your all into and having it ripped away from you without any understanding, I can now personally identify that as an abnormal reaction. That is not a normal situation to be put in. People do crazy shit and go to jail for it. People do crazy shit and go to prison for it. And now there's this whole tie into mental health that I think is going to be very detrimental for us in the long run when I initially had a lot of faith in that. I used to be a huge mental health advocate until I needed the help, and the help that I got didn't actually help me. It kept me in the lurch. It kept me small, and it kept me tired, and it kept me exhausted, and it kept me feeling like this is what I would have to be and do from here on out. It was not empowering. And it felt like I had no control. It felt like my body had control over me, and I was a victim of myself. The quote, an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior, is credited to Viktor Frankl, psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor. His area of psychiatry, I dove into it a little bit, and honestly, his biggest thing here is that people, humans, wish to find and fulfill meaning. We want to have meaning in our lives. We want to decide what matters and then go do it. He thinks that is the basic motivation for all humans, is the will to meaning. He wrote a book about it. I'd like to read it. Haven't got there yet. But if there's meaning that you don't understand, will you learn about it? Will you participate with it? Will you dance with it? Will you play with it? Will you acknowledge it and assign it meaning? Your will to meaning is the basic motivation in human beings. If you don't have control over yourself, if you're not a citizen like everybody else is, you kind of get to a point where it doesn't really make sense to keep following the rules. You're not part of this group anymore. Why would you play those games? Why would you follow those rules if you don't get the benefits? And they're not even benefits, they're just rights. Those are different things. They're not bonuses, they're defaults. And we're going to strip those away from people because they're bad. And I know that some bad is worse than other bads. And this gets dicey, but I don't care. You know, this new documentary came out over the weekend. It's called Quiet on Set, The Dark Side of Kids TV. And there's one season. I haven't watched any of it, but I've gotten a lot of exposure from people who have watched it just based on social media communication. So people posting their thoughts and feelings regarding the situation at hand. And it talks a lot about the terrible things that happened and how these kids were treated, how these kids were mistreated. And people are saying things like, this ruined my childhood. I grew up with this. This is messed up. The one that has the most shocking responses that I see being shared far too often, and not for comedy, but because it's relatable to this many people, again, based on the comments. This isn't somebody being funny. This is dark humor, but it's not a joke. It's not fake. People coming out with their stories and agreeing to this idea here, to this post. Nickelodeon should have casted me. I got molested for free. Some people would rather laugh about their issues and get on with it than cry about them. I don't identify with that. I don't identify with that scenario. But to see how popular that post has gotten, and to see people from my hometown posting it, seeing people from where I live now posting it, seeing people who I worked with 10 years ago posting it, people who I met in the bathroom of a bar 5 years ago, that post is the one that resonates more than anything else. That's the one where people are agreeing what happens to kids in Hollywood is okay. No one's going to agree to that. But I do see a lot of these arguments over who's really at fault. Is it the parents? Is it the abusers? Is it everybody else who knew what was going on and nobody spoke up about anything? A month ago, I saw a TikTok of this comedian who was doing crowd work. One of the guys in the crowd was talking about how he is in construction. They get into the conversation about what he's building, what it is, all this stuff. And they talk about how it's this big conspiracy theory like, oh, what's the building? It was a FEMA addition next to a school and how messed up it is. He didn't talk about it anymore. So I don't know if there are NDAs involved or if it's just like too embedded in what's going on in the city because the crowd went silent. Like everybody knows. Everybody knows. So what is the problem here? Looking into it myself, and this isn't the first time I've heard of this. When we get wrapped up in this conspiracy theory talk and like, that wouldn't happen here, we wouldn't let people do that. There's been a lot of exposure about how FEMA camps are basically like our modern day concentration camps. We're concentrating the masses, separating them from their families. Like we may not have gas chambers, but we're not doing what we should be doing. We've already learned how this plays out. And that's what was going on in the crowd there. Is that they're identifying that this building is basically that. And not only that, but it's attached to a school. And then you get into the other American history about what we used to do with Native American children. And where did they end up? All of this feels yucky in everybody's tummies. Is this going on at home? If you try to look into it, you'll be called a crazy conspiracy theorist. This whole track of mental health, like I said, there was a time when we needed it. There was a time when implementation would have made a difference. We're past that. And now it's weaponized. I have to say that the folks who want to have mental health taken into consideration, I don't think we understand mental health the way that we think we do. I've had diagnoses that I've overcame. I have had mental issues that I have been told are certain and specific in an exact way that are going to reappear eternally, that no longer do. These things only happen if you don't take care of them. And I haven't had good therapists to help me take care of them. When I've had therapists, they have been the sit and listen and validate. They have not been project-based. They have not been growth-based. They have been expression-based, and that is it. And that was not good enough for me. And I'm jealous of people who have had good experiences with those type of situations. But I get to the point with my therapist where I'm excited to go see them because I do feel good after expressing. But then I don't live my life any differently. And I'm repeating the same problems that I can't even identify because I'm in a pit. And I thought that therapy would help me get out of that. It didn't. And I didn't know how to ask for it. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know what I had hoped for. I just knew I didn't like what I was doing and I didn't know what I needed. And that's why I went to the professionals and the professionals just listened to me. And that was not helping me either. So I get sent to other professionals and they test me and they're not looking into the entirety of what I'm dealing with. They're looking into the aspect that sticks out like a sore thumb. I didn't have anybody to discuss my health with. I could discuss my thoughts and feelings with my therapists. I could discuss my health issues with my doctors. They all needed to be talking to each other. We all needed to have that information cross-referenced with each other. This isn't like a man-to-man scope job. The way that we have this set up is not in our highest and greatest good. If you have a mental health record, you're not taken seriously for important things. They think you can't handle it. Even if it's been years since an episode, there's still that feeling of like, oop, that may come back up again. My episodes were equivalent to toddler tantrums. They still are. I still have fits where I'm the one that is like Hulk smashing my phone because I'm outraged. That's something a child does. But I have those behaviors arise out of anger when I have unresolved issues. And I've never been taught to resolve them appropriately. So when I go in to resolve them the way that I know how to best, and it doesn't work, then I spend time learning other ways to do it. And I've learned through myself what works and what doesn't. I've been watching a legal drama lately, and honestly, this has been very frustrating for me, the way that these systems work. It's almost never about the client in the case. And I know it's a TV show. I know it's a drama on purpose. But also it's how it works. And when it works in your favor, that there's a relationship between your lawyer and the judge, I'm sure you've got no problem with that. And if it's your kid that calls you up and tells you they got a DUI, I can kind of understand where I was told, we all did it, you just got caught. That's the reality of the world we live in. Not that everybody's out drinking and driving. I don't think that one bit. But just that we're all getting away with some stuff that maybe we shouldn't be. And I'm not here to judge that because these systems put us in the places to make poor choices. There are no great alternatives. There's no space for redemption. Even if you make a valid point, but you have a poor history, that's the lens that people see you through before what you actually have to say in the moment. Stop doing that to people. Give somebody a chance to be different, an opportunity to do better, an expectation that it's possible. There was another car accident a couple years ago. There was a mom and a baby in one car and two young men in another. The men in the car were speeding and had some drinks that evening, and they hit the car of the woman with the baby, and the mom died. Now, this happened back in my hometown, and there was a lot of uproar about the situation because the news delivered it in that way. A mother and her son were struck while driving, and the mother was killed instantly, and both of those men who were in the other car walked away and get to live. The news explained it that she was a mother of 4, which is true. Her son was in the car when it happened, her youngest son. After a plea deal had been arranged, the driver pleaded guilty to aggravated vehicular homicide, aggravated vehicular assault, and vehicular assault. The baby was injured, but he's okay now. The kid who pled guilty had just been discharged from the Army and had just enlisted in the National Guard. His attorney claimed that it's tragic for both families, the victim's family and the driver's. Just a really tragic night is what was quoted. And it really was a tragic night for both families. Because when I got an OVI, my family didn't judge me and I didn't hurt anybody. But they loved and supported me anyway. And they didn't let me get off scot-free, and they didn't ask them to pay for anything. I just had to keep going. And I was lucky that I didn't get myself or anybody else really hurt. But in this accident, somebody got hurt and died. The boys who were in the car that night were absolutely dragged through the mud on social media, talking about how terrible they are. You know, people passing judgment from what they remembered in classes with the boys. They were boys. They were just as young and dumb as I was. And their outcomes were much different than mine. You see, when somebody goes to court for something like that, for an OVI, I'm not talking about manslaughter, I'm just talking about an OVI. If it was your nephew, you'd probably be on his side about it and tell him something like, hey, it's your first offense, they'll go easy on you. They'll see what you've done in the Army and how you're in the National Guard and maybe take that into consideration, that you're not a terrible person, that maybe you just did a terrible thing. You know, because you can support that. With my family, we support each other like that. We would try to give each other courage and hope moving forward, even if we deserved what we got in front of us. And if we got away with something we shouldn't have, we valued that and noted that and had gratitude for that. And if it wasn't as bad as it could have been, our behavior changes when the stakes are high. And after a really tragic night, when something like that happens, I don't feel like people need to go to jail over it. So full disclosure, my family was in the car, and it was a tragic night. The boys who were speeding in the car under the influence are my cousins. Extended cousins, but they're still family. And I know that fucked him up, and I don't want that for him. And on the other hand, the mom who died is married to my first cousin. I can't look at the situation and say, what if it was your family? It was my family in both cars. And I still stand by the fact that it just is what it is at this point. We can't undo it. And that time in prison is not going to benefit this man. He will pay for his mistakes, and that is all that will happen. But the family doesn't deserve that. I don't think my family does, and I don't think anybody else's family does either. This is not how people get helped. I don't know what our options are, but I know that this system is not benefiting us. It's destroying people, it's destroying families, and I don't see a way out, and that is something that makes me uncomfortable. It's unsettling, but once something is done, you can't undo it. There are plenty of options, but you can't undo what you have done. In the tarot, card number 10 is the Wheel of Fortune. Those are your external changes, what you're dealt. Card number 11 is Justice, fair treatment. And fair treatment to me is not, do you deserve this based on your actions? Just desserts, you're served what you deserved? No, that's cold-hearted justice, just ice. It just doesn't help anybody. It destroys and destroys and destroys. The next card is number 12, and it is the Hanged Man. That doesn't sound good on the front end, but if you look at the card, it's somebody hanging upside down by their foot with a very peaceful demeanor that indicates self-sacrifice and offers you a new perspective. I don't think we should worry about serving up justice, but maybe take that hanged man space and offer a platform for a discussion. Because what's happening in courtrooms isn't discussion. Nobody gets an opportunity to tell their story. Actually, that the more they share, the worse it is for them. Because that's how this system and how this game works. It's set up as a game where there are rules to follow. If you break the rules, you pay the consequences. The consequences in the court system alone, like I said, you don't know who the judge is in bed with. You don't know anything that's going to benefit you or hurt you based on stuff that's out of your control and has nothing to do with your situation. Even if you did break the law, you're not set up for a fair trial. And honestly, the worst thing about jury trials is the fact that they exist. This is modern day witch hangings. I know there's this whole we the people set this up in a way thing where if anybody's going to judge you, it should be a jury of your peers. I agree that in a justice system, I suppose that's how it would work. Let your community speak on behalf of the community. But what if that part's just altogether not necessary? What if there was space for open story and open communication? People are absolutely going to lie when the truth is not even safe to tell. Everything that happens in a courtroom is an act and an orchestration. It is not the real world, and it shouldn't have this impact on the real world. Even though real world events brought them into those rooms, those people are playing a crazy game with crazy language that doesn't serve you. It serves themselves and their systems. And when you're in the jury on that side of things, because now it's your responsibility as a juror to respond. You're the one putting this person in this place. You're the one making the final call. You're the one deciding if what the behavior was matches up with the claim at hand. I'm not going to say thank you for including me. I can't be a proud citizen in that environment. This stuff is yucky. This stuff is grimy. This stuff is dark. The stuff that happens to people and how we choose to deal with it, it does have an effect. And yes, everybody should behave according to what is morally right and fair. They should be just. But what is morally right and fair is absolutely variable based on the circumstances and the situations. And if we're going to keep putting people up against this system, we don't have an option for what's morally right and fair. Because what's morally right and fair is being able to tell your truth from where you're at. But you can only answer a line of questioning. And if you could submit and tell your story, you'd probably be advised not to because the system isn't set up for safety and honesty. Honestly, it's not set up for honesty whatsoever. And if it was, I'm not even sure it would matter. Because when the Boeing whistleblower came out, he was harassed and humiliated. And then we're told that he committed suicide. Others claiming that he was found dead. Either way, even if you do play by the rules, it doesn't seem to benefit you either. Whistleblowers are supposed to be protected. And now there are these conspiracy theories that maybe he didn't commit suicide, but that he was targeted. And his allegations were absolutely correct. So if this man's out to right a wrong, this is on a grand scale level of what happens when you try it. Is it worth it? At some point, something's got to give. Like I said, I don't have solutions and I don't have answers. I don't know what our way out is. But is this really serving us? Is this really serving our purpose? Is this really serving our community? I know some of these topics get really difficult and grimy, and I just talked about a few of them, especially with alcohol-related and car-related. And I brought up the Nickelodeon situation that's being exposed right now as well. There's a lot more out there that's hard to look at. Even some heavy hitters in the news this week I couldn't even bear to face or to say out loud. I wasn't in a position to analyze it or defend those people That being said, my mental does not change. I cannot comprehend how I see so much potential in the human spirit. I cannot fathom why we're continuing to allow these things to happen. I can't comprehend why we continue to participate with them or even encourage these systems to become stronger. There are some people that are susceptible to mental health issues at birth. It's just in their encoded DNA. And there are other people that it may develop down the road based off of their lived experiences. Have you heard of Aaron Bushnell? Aaron Bushnell was a U.S. airman, and he set himself on fire as an act of protest. He did this during a live stream where he explained who he was and what he was doing and why he was doing it. I will no longer be complicit in genocide. This man douses himself and lights himself on fire. But he doesn't just light himself on fire. He tries to light himself on fire and it doesn't work. He tries again and again and again and again. I watched this video and I heard that flick so many times. I saw so many opportunities for this man to back out. But he realized something, that once something is done, you can't undo it. Even though he had a chance to back out, his situation was not undone. When he did set himself on fire, the first person on site pulled out a gun. Granted, that's their training. He lit himself on fire at the embassy, at the Israeli embassy. So naturally at an embassy, this is a dangerous scenario. And that is the appropriate militant response. But at some point, we're going to have to start seeing each other as people. This whole scenario has been spun in a way that this is no longer a protest. The media has spun this to not like, oh, this is a protest that is just and respected or acknowledged in the fact that it's true and happening, but just that the pressures of the situation and his participation caused mental health issues. That this was a mental health issue, and that's why this man was doing that thing. Not that the actual situation or that the government's doing anything wrong. That part's not addressed in the news. The story is told truthfully. It's not identified as a protest. It's identified as mental health issues. Bringing up his past of growing up on a religious compound and promoting anarchy at one point in life. They tried to paint this picture that this airman was mentally unstable from his past. But if you look into the people that knew him and how he behaved and all the extracurriculars that he was involved in, everybody that knew him said he was a good person. Everybody that analyzed him said he had mental health issues. I used to think that no sane person would kill themselves. I used to agree that that was a mental health issue. To call this situation anything but a protest is unjust because it happened. He explained to you exactly why it was happening. You need to meet him where he's at and see it for what it is. This is how we get out and above this stuff. But instead, his life was taken too, and it was chalked up to mental health issues. But he was stable enough to be considered a quality airman for our military. What judgment do we trust? It just is, okay? It just happened. An abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior. Thanks for listening to another episode of Unravel with Allison. If you have any feedback, questions, want to chit-chat, or stay up to date on new releases, follow me on Instagram at Allison K. Steele. Let's keep in touch. Again, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next episode.